It's been a few days since the recent PlayStation Showcase, the hour-long event where Sony premiered many reveals and updates for titles either totally unknown, or rumored but not yet announced, or already known but not yet released. Basically, it was business as usual for your typical yearly event. But really, PlayStation Showcases are not yearly events. For a few years now, Sony has adopted a new type of structure for their shows, using State of Play to make smaller or more focused announcements for either a group of games or one specific huge game that many are anticipating. And these supplement the much rarer showcase events that are no longer a year-by-year thing. Before the newest showcase, the last one was way back in September 2021. A 20-month gap. That previous event had some heavy hitters in it, including the premiere of Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine by Insomniac. And that showcase clocked in at only 40 minutes in length. So, with this newest one stated to be a little over an hour long, people's expectations were understandably high. It had been a whopping 1 year and 8 months between events, and there's been a lot of radio silence from many first-party PlayStation studios the entire time. Surely, a lot of them would have something to give us here, right? Now, I'm just gonna preface this by saying I know there's a couple more shows left, including Summer Game Fest, where some other big titles might appear. But this video will be discussing why the PlayStation Showcase left the impression it did. Usually when I go over conferences, directs, or showcases like this, I go over the games that interested me the most. I speculate about things, offer my thoughts on what direction they could go in, and cross my fingers for a good final product. I don't dwell too much on the actual quality of the overall show, or offer a grade or anything like that. But I'll be doing something different here. Instead, I'm going to dive directly into addressing the elephant in the room, which is the plain fact that this showcase was so disappointing. Not bad per se, I still think it was overall acceptable. But honestly, many people, including me, felt like it should have been better than that, considering the huge gap since the showcase before it. Granted, it did have a large quantity of games, and most of them actually do look promising, particularly the ones that had something of actual substance to show. Some didn't, but we'll get to that later. If I feel positively about most of the games though, then what's the issue? The big issue here was the lack of heavy hitters, the actual hype generators. And this weakness shows itself in more ways than one. First is the distinct lack of a first-party presence, and second is the lack of updates for big games that were already announced months ago. The entire PlayStation Studios division is made up of 22 active studios. If we leave out the support studios and studios who just released a game within the last year to year and a half, then we're left with 7 studios who are working on something we know nothing about. And this isn't even including studios with multiple teams who might also have a new project that's been cooking for a while, like Guerrilla and Santa Monica. This doesn't even include Naughty Dog either, who are working on the Last of Us factions, or at least trying to. So, to be blunt, where was Sucker Punch? Where was Housemarque? Where was Bluepoint? Team Asobi, Bend Studio, London Studio, Media Molecule? All of these studios' last games are between 2 to 3 years old now, and they still have nothing to even tease us with yet. I know Sony wants to announce games that are not that far off, but none of these studios' games are expected to be out before 2025? Seriously? Even then, I wouldn't mind the wait, I would just love to see what they're doing. After all, Wolverine was announced in the 2021 showcase even though it's expected in 2024. Sony didn't have an issue giving us an early reveal for that, and as far as I can tell, very few people, if any, really complained that it was too early. We were all just glad to know that it was going to happen. Basically, after the showcase, we still know nothing of Sony's first-party plans outside of live service games, which we already knew about for over a year right after they acquired Bungie. And regarding updates for big games, there's a lot missing here too. We still don't have a release date for Stellar Blade or any new details for Rise of the Ronin, Silent Hill 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Kingdom Hearts 4, Death Stranding 2, which might be in the Summer Game Fest, let's be honest. Or Pragmata, assuming it's not been turned into this generation's Deep Down. Again, I know it's possible for some or even all of these games to appear in the very near future, but they're so closely tied to the PlayStation brand, it's hard to imagine why Sony would want a showcase without at least a few of them in it. And even beyond all that, there's still an issue with some of the stuff that was shown. It was announced some time ago that PlayStation planned on launching 10 live service games over the next few years. A statement that caused many groans and eye rolls across the world, because we've seen multiple times already live service games that aren't fun, well-structured, and content-loaded on day one that are basically dead on arrival. But that's why Sony acquired Bungie, to leverage their experience in that space. Anyway, some of these live service games were announced here in the showcase, specifically Helldivers 2, Fair Games, Marathon, and Concord. Basically, if it's multiplayer focused and launching on both PS5 and PC, then it's likely one of those planned live service games. With the exception of Helldivers 2, none of the games had any gameplay to speak of. Fair Games made it pretty clear that it's a PvPvE heist game, but we still couldn't parse the actual structure of a match. Quite frankly, the announcement trailer made the game look like the blandest Ubisoft flavor of the season game imaginable. Marathon is an extraction shooter like Tarkov or Call of Duty's DMZ mode, but again, we don't know anything beyond that. But I've seen fans of the original Marathon games express disappointment in the new direction, but if we're being real here, I don't think this IP would have come back in any other form. And Concord's trailer was the fucking worst of them all. It was literally just a title drop. Nobody could fucking tell anything from this 50 seconds of nothing besides the fact that it's sci-fi. This makes the lack of updates for big games even worse, because why couldn't we get new trailers for games that already showed us gameplay, but we got an announcement for a live service title that barely even showed us its own concept? Laughable. Basically, the primary reason why the showcase was so underwhelming was because it lacked the announcements people actually tuned in for, and some announcements that should have been big, the live service games, were dragged down by being uninteresting CG trailers that offered no substance. This is going to sound unnecessarily insulting to Xbox, and I apologize because it's not my intent, but it's probably the best way to summarize how I feel. This showcase felt like I was watching your typical Microsoft E3 conference. It felt like they were just throwing random games at me, expecting a huge reaction, when in fact, only a few actually got one. It felt like they were hoping that the quantity would make up for the lack of heavy hitters. But when heavy hitters are why people watch these in the first place, their absence was always going to be noticed. Honestly, considering the content of the showcase, I actually believe it would have worked much better if it were divided into two longer state of plays. The first, focusing on Spider-Man 2, Final Fantasy XVI, Alan Wake 2, Fair Games, Sword of the Sea, Assassin's Creed Mirage, Destiny 2 Final Shape, Talos Principle 2, The Plucky Squire, and Tower of Fantasy. The second state of play would feature Helldivers 2, Neva, Metal Gear Solid Delta, Marathon, Dragon's Dogma 2, Ghost Runner 2, Resident Evil 4 VR, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Towers of Agaspa, Phantom Blade Zero, and Concord. Any others I'm missing could just be split evenly between the two. Each state of play would have its own fair share of first-party and third-party titles with some smaller games mixed in. This way, expectation management would have been much easier, and people would have been more likely to walk away content. I respect the decision of only showing games that are within a year or so of releasing, but if the end result is an event with a distinct absence of big names, then I would have rather waited another 6 to 8 months. I know some of you are still not really understanding why the show is so disappointing, so let me word it in another way. Imagine, 5 months ago, toward the beginning of the year, someone told you that the next PlayStation showcase was going to be in May, and it was going to reveal the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. but also have absolutely no updates on Stellar Blade, Rise of the Ronin, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Death Stranding 2, Silent Hill 2, and give no word whatsoever on the next projects by Sucker Punch, Bluepoint, Bend Studio, London Studio, Housemarque, and Team Asobi. Would you have believed them? And even if you did, would that have sounded like a showcase worth a 20-month wait? As of making this video, a few reports have popped up that Sony had some other trailers prepared behind closed doors, and for some reason, they were not part of the showcase, including a PC port coming very soon. If that's true, it would be extremely weird for Sony to purposely hold out on big names for their own show. A more charitable interpretation of this would be that they're so confident in their strength within the video game market that they feel they could drop whatever they want, whenever they want, and still dominate the news cycle. And that wouldn't necessarily be untrue. After all, they announced this showcase only about a week before it aired, and it still scored millions of viewers. Anyway, that's pretty much my review of the show itself. But for posterity's sake, I will give a rundown of games that interest me the most. Helldivers 2 looks really fun. Ghost Runner 2 was one of the few surprises that really got a reaction out of me, and I'm looking forward to it. Phantom Blade Zero looks promising, and I hope it actually releases, unlike a lot of other fancy-looking Chinese action games that are taking years upon years to come out. Looking at you, Lost Soul aside. Talos Principle 2 looks really cool, and although I never got around to playing the first game, the sequel seems like a massive upgrade in scope. The Plucky Squire looks extremely fun, and is another one of the few surprises that I'm keeping a close eye on. Assassin's Creed Mirage actually has my attention for a change since we're going back to the traditional series mechanics. Dragon's Dogma 2 is the final surprise that really got me excited, even though I did expect it to be there. It looks remarkable, and I can't wait to have it in my hands. And of course, Spider-Man 2 looks really promising. Insomniac has done a great job of making their own Marvel continuity, and I can't wait to see what they do with Venom, Kraven, and the others. Alan Wake 2 looks fantastic until the announcement of it being a digital-only release took the taste out of my mouth. Epic Games is publishing it, and of course they are too cheap to ship a game on disc, especially one that might need 2 discs for a full installation. But disc printing is actually extremely cheap. It's usually shipping and freight that costs the most in physical production. Another reason stated why it's a digital-only release is that it's because consumers are preferring digital games, but that's a bold-faced exaggeration. According to Sony's own financials released just a few days ago, the entire physical game market still pulls in about $7 to $8 billion per year. And in the European market, about half of all full game sales are physical. It's practically a straight 50-50. And a straight up fucking lie that we were told was that the digital only release was chosen so that the game would stay $60 instead of increase to $70. And sadly, people who are paranoid of the price increase believe this without thinking about it. If shipping so many copies was such a powerful contributor to a price increase, then why were the physical PS5 and Xbox Series versions of Resident Evil 4 Remake still $60? Give me a fucking break. Conveniently, I recently released a video about physical media and how it's not actually close to dying at all. Check it out if you have the time, a link is in the description. Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater is a bit of a mixed bag. My instinctual response to a Kojima-less Metal Gear game is not a positive one, but it's already been announced that it plans on being a very faithful remake, which both relieves me and confuses me more, because they also announced the Master Collection, which is a new set of re-releases for the older games, so they're no longer trapped on dead platforms. This is fantastic, but Snake Eater is going to be part of the first volume, and it's based on the HD Collection version, which is excellent. It kinda makes me wonder what the purpose of the remake is if it's just going to be the same game that's getting a new re-release of its own HD remaster. but with prettier remade assets. A theory I've seen people throw around is that they're planning a new remake series, and starting with Snake Eater because it's chronologically the earliest events in the franchise. This would intrigue me because maybe it means they're going to make the overarching plot of the entire series a bit more digestible. I would normally be against this, but since the remaster collection exists, I am alright with two continuities coexisting in tandem. And then there's Final Fantasy XVI. Pretty sure I don't need to explain how hype I am for this one, since it's the one game I expect to be my game of the year, assuming it meets my admittedly high expectations. And last and certainly least, the formal announcement of Project Q, the handheld device made exclusively for remote play with the PlayStation 5. Its form factor is an extremely awkward-looking DualSense cut in half with a monitor in the middle. It probably feels fine, but man, it's an eyesore. In terms of actual use though, it's hard to gauge what it's actually capable of at the moment. I've seen people suggest jailbreaking it and using it for emulation, but there's a problem with that. What if it's only capable of video playback and Wi-Fi connectivity? If it's a device meant only for remote play, it could be useless for anything other than those two things. It might not have any support for onboard storage besides a bit of room for firmware. That means no internal SSD or even a slot for an SD card. It's capable of 1080p 60 FPS playback, so of course it has some graphical processing power. So even if it can be turned into an emulator, it might need soldering and it might not be strong enough to go past very early consoles. And then there's the question of battery life and price. Basically, my very first impressions lead me to think this device looks like complete shit, both visually and functionally. I'm gonna need some major details about it before it even has a chance to turn my opinion around. I've already seen rumors of its battery life lasting a mere 3 to 4 hours, making it no better than a normal DualSense on its own. If so, I hope to God that this is not a dime over $150 or it'll have an issue leaving store shelves. And I guess that pretty much does it for everything. If I had to give it a grade, I would give the showcase a C. And that's a reluctant one. If this were a normal yearly E3 conference, a C wouldn't be that big of a deal. But considering the 20-month wait since the last showcase, this should have been a B+ show at minimum. This concludes my thoughts on the PlayStation Showcase 2023. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.